Okay. Hi BookTube, Aaron here. I hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be doing a bit of a reading update. I've read a few books since the start of the month, so I thought I'd try and rattle through them. I've popped them into their own little categories in the hopes that I don't ramble on for too long. The first category is Sherlock Holmes. So this month in February, there's been a reading event here on BookTube called Holmes is Where the Heart Is, which is a celebration of the world of Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. So I've been reading a fair bit of Sherlock Holmes this month. There were prompts for Holmes is Where the Heart Is, so you could I think in the first week read a Sherlock Holmes novel, then in the following week read a Sherlock Holmes short story or as many short stories as you want, and then it goes on from there with pastiche fiction and legacy fiction and things like that. I've been sticking to the sort of original stuff by Conan Doyle. I haven't gone off into other waters yet. I'm not sure if I will. But I read one novel and a fair few short stories. The novel that I read was A Study in Scarlet. I'd never read it before, and I've heard a fair bit about it. And so it was really fun, really satisfying to read it for myself, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Um, I think it just reminded me so much of what I love with Sherlock Holmes. It's not necessarily how bloody the crime is, or how nefarious the villain is, or how scandalous a certain situation is. It's all about the problem. It's a problem that needs cracking, and then it's just so satisfying once it's all lined out. And there's something, and I'm not sure exactly what it is that Conan Doyle is doing, but it's when you're reading someone explaining the situation, or when you're there with Holmes and Watson at a murder scene, or the scene of a theft or something. Um, just the way everything is laid out before you, it always makes me feel excited. And it was the same with this when they go to an empty house where there's a dead body and no murder weapon, no sign, no visible sign on the body of them being attacked with a weapon at all. No wounds or anything really. There's a wedding ring on the floor. There's a burnt out candle, and there's the German word Rache, which means revenge, on the wall, sort of scrawled into the wall with blood. And so that's the situation. And there's a lot more, and the police can't make head or tail of it, or they kind of have their own theories. And it's just great. I really enjoyed it. Um, One of the things I've heard a fair few people say about it, some people have enjoyed this fact, some people haven't. It's just that in the second half of the book, it just goes off into a completely different direction. It gives you a backstory of the person who committed the crime, and it's set in America. It's kind of like a western, and it involves the Mormons, and it is quite wild. And some people find it a bit too disconnected. I've heard people say that there isn't enough Holmes in it. Whereas actually, I think that this book it's a great introduction to Holmes, and I think if you're reading it, knowing that this was the first Sherlock Holmes book, I mean, you're getting an introduction to his character. You're getting his first meeting with Watson, and then moving into 221B Baker Street, and you're getting to see him put together this mystery. Um, and yeah, then it does go off into this backstory, but that backstory on the whole is really fun and I think pretty well written. And it doesn't. I didn't feel impatient to get back to Holmes as I was reading it. In some later stories, I think yeah, Conan Doyle does a much better job of um, I don't know, telling those backstories a little more succinctly. Like in a short story I read called The Boscombe Valley Mystery, where there's a character who's been in Australia, and he tells his story, and and that's just done in a couple of pages, if less. And so he definitely gets better at doing that quickly. But I still really enjoyed it. The only quibble I have with that backstory is that it's not from Watson's perspective. So it's all sort of laid out as if it's sort of Watson's memoirs of cases with Sherlock Holmes, and then suddenly there's this other authorial voice telling us this backstory, and then once it's all over, it's like, right, all done here, back to Watson. um, and that feels a little thrown together. But other than that, on the whole, as a book, I thought it was really fun. So that was a study in Scarlet. And then I also read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I did read this on my Kindle as well. I've got this here just so I've got a table of contents so I can go through some of the stories I read. Some of them were familiar, like Scandal in Bohemia. What else is there? The Red-Headed League, The Five Orange Pips. What else had I read before? The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And that might have been it that I'd read before. And then the rest were pretty much all new to me. A Case of Identity, which was a really interesting one where they barely leave 221B, and I actually found I quite enjoyed those ones where someone comes to them, tells them a situation, they might venture out to one or two places to talk to someone, but really there's not much action. It's all going on in Holmes's head, and I really actually quite enjoyed those ones. They're still, at least for me, just as intriguing and as satisfying at the end. As I said, the Boscombe Valley this mystery, which I liked, the man with the twisted lip, which I didn't love so much. It was similar to the Case of Identity, where in a way there's not really a crime that's been committed. That there are a few of those in here where it's more of a scandal or a problem. I mean, Scandal in Bohemia is probably the most notable of those ones. Um, but yeah, the man with the twisted lip is a kind of missing person one. But the best thing about that is the is the opening when Watson's been called out by a friend. Um, she's asked him to pick up her husband, who's been away for days on end, and she thinks he's in this opium den in this rather dingy, dodgy street. So Watson agrees to go to pick up her husband, and he he goes in, and who does he run into but Sherlock Holmes? And it's just a great opening, and actually he's there on a case, and then they go off, and I feel a bit bad for Watson's wife, who's told him, yeah, sure, go out. I don't mind you. You're helping some friends, and then he just goes off with Sherlock Holmes and isn't back home to his wife for quite a long time after that. So I imagine she was quite worried. Um, what else is it? The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb, which is one of those ones where just the person who's come to 221B Baker Street, because they often just tell their story, and they're explaining the predicament that they're in, and that's the most riveting part of that story. So yeah, just it was just a lot of fun. Some familiar stories, but lots of stories that were new to me, because I in the past I've just sort of picked through a couple of at random, more or less. So that was a lot of fun, and that was it for Sherlock Holmes. I don't know whether I'll read any more this month, but we'll see. I was reading the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes um, while I was commuting, and so it was a lot of fun on the train to be reading a Sherlock Holmes mystery. So I might move on to the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, and maybe I'll have that as the thing that I read when I'm on the train. Then next up, we've got three poetry books. on the whole, they're pretty good. There was Mad Women by Gabriela Mistral, a Chilean poet who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. This is edited and translated by Randall Couch. Um, and it's actually quite a curious book. So these Mad Women poems were a cycle of poems within another, like a larger poetry collection. Um, and so the reason this is about as thick as your average poetry collection is because it's facing pages. It's a parallel translation, um, and um, I, I've heard someone say that actually these poems are some of her best that she ever wrote. A lot of them are um, kind of monologues from women in various sort of desperate um, situations. They're often grieving, or in a similar situation to that, there are women from mythology like Clytemnestra, if I'm saying her name right, and people like that. And I was looking back at it and thinking that I might have appreciated them more in the context that they were originally included in, and with the kind of contrast with the rest of her poetry, which sounds really interesting. And I had heard of another sort of collected edition of her works, translated by, I think, by Ursula K. Le Guin. If I'm, yeah, I think that's right. It was by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I'll might try and pick that up and see what that's like. But on the whole, I enjoyed this. Although the main thing I took away from it was just the language. Some of her um, imagery, really, on the whole, is very earthy and vibrant. So the first poem in here opens, I killed a woman in me, one I did not love. She was the blazing flower of the mountain cactus. She was a drought and fire, never cooling her body. Um, and yeah, sort of goes on from there. But the way sort of nature and certain landscapes are incorporated into it was really what I took away from it. So I'd really like to explore her poetry more. But yeah, I just felt that this collection as a whole was kind of wanting something, and I don't know whether it was needing the poems in a larger context, whether it's the translation, or maybe it is that I just just didn't like the poems as much as I wanted to, and so it's a poet I'm gonna keep exploring. Then next up, we've got Langston Hughes. I just found a free selection of some of his earlier poems that are out of copyright um, on my Kindle here. It had quite a few of his famous poems in there. And on the whole, I enjoyed them. There's often something um, deceptively simple and sing-songy to his poetry. There's often a fair bit of repetition, but he kind of twists. I don't know. It's like he's threading something with his poems, and that each time it twists around, this word that's being repeated means something slightly different. Um, a lot of the poems in here are actually much bleaker than I was expecting. That there are some poems that are it's right in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance, and so there's a kind of energy there, and he's trying to celebrate this time in this place. But there's also blues in here, and there's desperation, and there's poems about people who are in desperate situations. So yeah, on the whole, it's a similar situation to Mistral, where I was definitely intrigued by the poetry. There were elements of this that I enjoyed, poems that I enjoyed, but would like to seek out these poems in a larger context, and see what comes of it. And then the other poetry collection that I finished was Rain by Don Patterson. And I really enjoyed this. I just felt like I was reading something by a poet who's just really confident and knows what they're doing. Didn't love every poem in here, but there are just some poems in here that were just put so wonderfully and just made you slow down and pay attention. There's a poem in here called The Error, which is very short, so I might read that. And this was one of the first ones that just made me stop and just appreciate the confidence and just how well put this poem was. This is The Error. As the bird is to the air, and the whale is to the sea, so man is to his dream. His world is just the glare of the world's utility, returned by his eye-beam. Each self-reflecting mind is in this manner destined to forget its element. And this is why we find, however deep we listen, that the skies are silent. So I don't know, there's just something very confident, and he's not overstating what he's saying. It's a rhyming poem, but it doesn't feel flowery or over the top. It feels very distilled. Very, nothing there is superfluous. Really enjoyed this collection of Don Patterson, and I've not read tons by him, so I was amazed that I hadn't really got to him sooner. And then the last thing I've got here that I finished. Oops, I'm making a mess of here. It was a non-fiction that I was reading for Historathon, which is a year-long reading event headed up by Vin from Revenant Reads, to encourage you to read more non-fiction history. And at the beginning of the year, it's more concentrated on ancient history, or sort of prehistory through to late antiquity. And so I picked up The Classical World by Robin Lane Fox, and it was just a great overview of the classical period. He has it down here: an epic history from Homer to Hadrian, and that really is, what it is. He pretty much does, what it says there, and even though it's like 600 pages long, it's very much a sweeping history. He doesn't often slow down and go into too much detail, but I think on the whole he does just enough to give you an idea of what was going on, and then you can kind of use this as a jumping off point to think about, what areas of ancient history are you interested in, and you can, sort of zone in on them, and then sort of jump into, there might be more specific books. So there were areas in here when I felt myself getting a little frustrated, but particularly when he's looking at the death of Alexander the Great and the kind of fallout after he died, and I was kind of wishing there was more detail there. But again, there are plenty of books that you can jump off into that just deal with that specifically. And the same with the fall of the Roman Republic, which I have read about before, and about the Emperor Augustus, and the sort of early days of the empire. Again, I was wishing that he'd go into a bit more detail, but again, there are books that deal with that. So I think that's something to keep in mind if you're picking this up. It's not going to go right into the weeds. Every now and then he will slow down on a particular point. There's a whole chapter about life in Pompeii, which I suppose is useful just to give you a general idea of what the Romans were like. And I think it's also worth knowing that this is, on the whole, concentrated on the Greek world, the Hellenistic world, and on the Roman world, and how they kind of bled into each other in a way, I suppose. But you're also getting the people that they had an influence on, or they fought with, and so you're getting a bit of a look into into Egypt and into Judea in the sort of late BC, early AD. Look at the Persians and sort of, there are moments when horizons are broadened, but it's only when it's the horizon of the empire that he's kind of focusing on. So again, that's just something to bear in mind, that it's not a kind of worldwide history. It's very much on what we typically call the classical world of Greece and Rome. And there we go. That's everything that I've read so far. Um, this month, a lot of my attention has been taken up uh, by the brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I've been reading this translation by Michael R. Katz. I'm nearly there, getting towards the end, and I am really enjoying it. I think I'm enjoying it more than the first time. I've also picked up the collected poems of Czeslaw Milosz. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. A Polish poet who won the Nobel Prize, and this is translated by tons of people. It's a collection of many translations of his poems into English. But I've been really enjoying that. And as a kind of reading reset button, every now and then, if I'm not sure what to read, again, I've just been picking up Kafka's Diary. So it's just a great book just to have on hand ready, because it's, yeah, just a great place to go when I'm not sure where else to go. And there we have it. So I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that February has been a fairly good reading month for you. Yeah, let me know if any of these books have piqued your curiosity, or if you've read them and you have differing opinions. But yeah, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.